Hi. Okay, um, while I was doing extra research for the Seattle Newsboy Union, I came across something very interesting concerning the Kid Blink strike. So we're going to put on hold the Seattle series and take a look at what I found. I actually did notes because I got to tell you something. I have tried to do this video several times. I was actually editing, and it turned out that the video did several cuts. I wasn't the one cutting it either. It like glitched several times. Oh, I was so mad. I was like, finally, we can. No, apparently we can't. All right, so I'm going to first show you the article that I found. Maybe. All right. And this is when my computer decides to be slow. Um, this is in the Seattle Post Intelligencer, and it was posted or printed, I should say, July 24th. And the title of it says Faking Yellow Journalism. Now, the reason that caught my eye, let me switch these really quick. The reason that it caught my eye is because of what yellow journalism is. I mean, what? So before we get into that, let me read this really quick. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but to the Western stranger in New York, the city's most wonderful institution is the Extra newspaper. It is the acme of faking yellow journalism, the limit of open, barefaced fraud. Okay. Mind you, there are reliable newspapers in New York, and at rare intervals, there are honest extras issued from their presses, but they are the wide exception. The remarkable part of it is that they sell and sell well, and at the fault lies largely in public encouragement. It is a common thing to hear 10 o'clock extras cried on the streets at 7 and 8 o'clock in the evening, a popular method of working off large numbers of the fraudulent sheets is to send gangs of men and boys through the large residential districts crying out startling things that have not happened and are not mentioned in the paper which they sell. Okay, so in other words, yelling headlines that never happened. Again, this was during Kid Blink's strike. Kid Blink's strike, him and his group of newsies that went up against Pulitzer and Hearst, that went from the 18th of July to August 2nd, 125 years ago. And the fact that a newspaper is calling out another newspaper, that's a big deal. I mean, strike or not, that's a big deal. Okay, so let's look at yellow journalism really quick. I mean, sure, at this point, pretty much tabloid. Another word for it would be tabloid. But with yellow journalism, it's sensationalism and exaggerations with a nugget of truth. I mean, there was a bit of truth in there. Uh, with tabloids, there's no truth at all. I mean, in high school, I remember headlines like, well, the most famous was when Titanic came into theaters, and there was the one talking about how Captain Smith was found in a lifeboat with a cigarette and an apple. Like he survived. And the one about Hillary having an alien baby. So, of course, Men in Black would use that further. And at least with yellow journalism back way back in the 1890s, there was a little bit of truth. Okay. Um, large flashy headlines, a lot of pictures, imagery, that kind of thing, eye-catching. That was the whole deal of it. I mean, you a marquee in print, best way to put it. And I mean, the newsies were basically like the guys that stand out in front of the thing saying, "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" Yeah, the carnies. Yeah, the kids were basically yelling out so that you would buy the stuff, buy the merchandise. But here's the thing, as it continued, y- you know, and took on a life of its own, you had imaginary images, Photoshop, and fake experts and and interviews. You also had false headlines. One of the most famous was Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. That whole thing was during the Spanish-American War. The ship, the Maine, was at dock and it mysteriously blew up. To this day, nobody knows what happened. It blew up. I mean, we do know that. But as for if it was an accident or who did it, we don't know. But Hearst took it upon himself to put blame on Spain. No evidence. He just did it. And and that's what I mean, false headlines. And so Pulitzer and Hearst paved the way for yellow journalism. These flashy headlines, flashy imagery, and they did. They cut up images. I mean, if you think that Photoshop started in the 80s and 90s or in the 2000s with MySpace and all that, you got another thing coming, man. Look up the pictures where the people are holding their heads. That was a trend on itself. And or the ones where it has the ghosts behind them. Oh yeah. They loved those. And being visited by spirits and all that. It's supernatural, or not supernatural, but these superstitious people that just loved making pictures like that and everything. Silly, silly, silly. But Pulitzer seemed to focus. Look, Pulitzer was a fan of politics. I mean, he absolutely loved politics. He wanted to actually get into American politics, but for whatever reason he couldn't. The story goes that because of his heavy accent, he couldn't get into politics. I would believe that, but he used yellow journalism to go after politics. Hearst, everybody was a victim. Everybody was a victim, and it shows. One of the reasons that just in the last 10, 15 years, people are starting to realize that Bruce Ismay wasn't that bad. Oh, he already knew that his life was over when he stepped into that lifeboat. He already knew. I have stacks of books that talk about how survivors that were on the Carpathia, when the doctor tried to help him, he refused help. He wanted to die then, you know. And but, when there's a tragedy, whenever somebody's going to be demonized and it was him, but Hearst would just not. let up. There was the money boat with all the aristocrats. Other papers went after them and said, "Why didn't you try to save somebody?" "Oh, we can't have dirty third class with us." I could, I've said a lot of how I feel in the Roscoe Arbuckle video I did. Yeah, I have nothing nice to say about Pulitzer. I mean, about Hearst. And it just, anyway, but this yellow journalism took on a life of its own. But the thing is that people were aware of yellow journalism. They were it wasn't like one of those open secrets. People knew, okay, because Pulitzer and Hearst were fighting. And so because of this fight, there were cartoons right and left, the political cartoons and when you saw these political cartoons, it showed the yellow papers everywhere or a yellow printer and that kind of thing. It also showed them dressed in yellow suits, this, that, and the other. There were other people who, from other countries, who talked about um, how mainly it's just the World and Journal that are releasing the yellow papers and the yellow press and are printing, the yellow presses are printing that. And so it was like not all presses are dishing this out. Just be aware of that. And so yeah, just Joe and Billy are doing it. No. And in fact, it had a mascot. Now, it didn't start off because the yellow kid, which I'm mad at myself that I didn't fit the pieces together. Because if you remember in that last segment that I did of of the Seattle Newsboy Union, I mentioned the play that's titled The Yellow Kid. And so obviously somebody decided to establish a play, a stage production about the Yellow Kid. Now, the Yellow Kid actually started as um, a strip with Hogan's Alley. I'll put the information in the description box. I mean, in the description box. Don't talk so fast. But, but this yellow kid ended up a comic strip first in Pulitzer's paper and then in Hearst's paper. I was reading a little bit, and the creator for the Yellow Kid tried to get copyright and for some reason was declined. And how frustrating. But I saw that there was merchandise for the Yellow Kit, like a puzzle and all that sort of thing. So this it was, why not? No, why not? But there were other illustrations surrounding the yellow papers and like so people knew paper presses because of the fact that it was so famous that Pulitzer and Hearst, their fight was so famous. You had the Journal, you had the World paper companies, and the owners were fighting. Why not? And even the Newsies, they were talking about how they sold yellow rags. They were aware of it. So why bring up this article? Why did it catch my eye so hard? Well, first of all, because they're talking about fraud and talking about stuff that didn't happen. So I did some digging, and there was an article. Now, first of all, I want you to understand that as we continue, because we're going to go into this Kid Blink strike, of course, and I looked at newspapers all across the U.S., not just New York and not just Seattle. Okay. And I'll make sure to mention the newspapers and I will try. And, but when it talks about faking journalism, I mean, basically, are you piling on more sensationalism to hide the truth? No, because it's fiction, a thing that never happened. It just said that. And printing stories, events that never happened. You're better off writing a fiction book. Why are you wasting the general public's time? Which you will see how destructive it became. I got pissed off. And the newspapers that chose to print uh this fake news. Oh yeah, you thought fake news was a new thing? Nah, it went way back. They were called yellow journals. Now the newspapers, as it shows here, back in 1899, I'm sure it went back further because I was finding where newspapers were calling out such things um with our soldiers overseas. Now again, we had soldiers with the Spanish American War uh in 1898. So I have a feeling that it started then. Now, so the papers were constantly calling it out. They were constantly calling out these lies, these fake articles, the things that didn't happen. And it was a, by this point, when Kid Blink and his crew went up against Pulitzer and Hearst, it had turned into a toxic epidemic. The newspaper industry had had it, absolutely had it. And um, as it turns out, other newspapers across the US did some detective work to find that these yellow journals went straight to New York, mainly the World and the Journal, and called them out. I mean, they would expose them. It wasn't just, oh yeah, this journal at the New York place, at one of those New York newspaper companies. No, they just flat out said the World, the Journal, or wherever it was. There was a New York Evening Post, which we'll get to that in this. And it's just like they were done. And so by the time the strike happened, the general public was over it too. No wonder Kid Blink had such a backing from the general public. Uh-huh. It, see, I get it now. But I do have to mention this because there was somebody who uh let me backtrack a little bit. See, because a lot of the fans of Newsies, they become history detectives and historians and the like. And there was one who talked about this event that they had been researching for quite some time. And they said, oh, yeah, I mean, their seller was basically, I spent 10 years pulling apart the yellow journalism to get at the truth of this thing. I'm going to call bullshit. I think that was about a year and a half ago that they posted that. And even then, I was like, 10 years? It took you 10 years? Now, when it comes to me researching the Newsy strike, I think the last time I actually sat down to look at the Newsy strike was probably 2 years ago. It's not like my first priority ever. Not anymore. So I do want to make that clear. You know, maybe 15 years ago, I probably every day would sit and search it up and all that, but uh, not anymore. But there are people who sit and they look it up and they document it and great. I'm not making fun of them. Me, however, I have other moments in history that are my first priority right now. But what I'm saying is when your seller is that you spent 10 years, but it's confirmed that newspapers 10 years, back in 1890, 125 years ago, it took them maybe 2 years when this thing started to escalate. How hard are you researching that time period that you didn't find this? That you didn't find the yellow journals or the yellow journal epidemic. I'm just saying. 'Cause, you know, anyway, yeah, don't do that. Okay. Anyway, uh, so so yeah, how damaging could this be? Back in 1899, how damaging could fake news be? I mean, people knew that the sensationalism, they had a mascot. It can't be that bad if they knew about it and they were practically bragging about it and everything. So how bad could it be? Well, people were getting hurt. The victims, there were victims. I think that's the worst part about it. And consider, like I said, people, the newspaper industry was calling out the newspaper industry. There you go, right there. When they have to do detective work to find out who exactly is pulling this, they refuse to print the times that they would print retractions and apologize, which was non-apologies, proving that people don't change. They would throw people under the bus. It was like, you've got to be kidding me. So let's look at the first example when yellow journals went after the American army. Um, be oh man, I gotta take a moment because this is really gonna piss me off. Um, so there's this article, and it talks about actually this is the moment. It's not an article; it's actually a letter where the general, what was his name? General Shafter or Shafter. I think it's Shafter. He speaks up because a yellow journal stated that his army base was not feeding and clothing and housing uh, the soldiers. Now, at this time in 1899, our American soldiers were in the Philippines. Okay. Um, and it says newspaper greed is satisfied by picturing the Oregon troops as mendicants, which they were begging. Army officers resent the gratuitous insult given to the soldiers by a yellow journal seeking to gain cheap notoriety. Oh, this is the San Francisco Call, July 20th. So 2 days into the strike, into Kid Blink's strike. And this general just tears in. He's like, let me tell you that as soon as a soldier comes into my military base, he is fully clothed, he is fed, he is given a place to stay. I mean, this is ridiculous. Okay, now I don't know where the it said Oregon troops. So but and I tried to find the article that it said um that it talked about. Just it's probably one of those that mysteriously went up in flames. But because they don't mention, did it mention? I didn't see. Yeah, it says here at one point, there was somebody, the quartermaster wanted to turn in 700 overcoats besides a lot of blankets and other clothing. So they had the supplies. And this guy, this yellow journal was stating that uh, the troops had no food, water, anything. They were begging neighboring residents and everything. It's a load of bullshit is what it was. And and he signed it. He should not have had to come out and say this, but I was seeing this a lot, and we'll get to that. But I do want to point out, I actually uncovered something so vile and disgusting. I cannot believe that the newspaper, I don't care if it was Hearst, Pulitzer, whoever, doesn't matter. The fact that they went so far for a story is disgusting. And I've seen a lot in my day. Okay. When I was at the dance studio, I saw a lot of stunts pulled. Okay. When you're part of the theater industry, you see a lot. All right. This took the cake. So, all right. Ooh. So again, our soldiers were in the Philippines. It was the Philippine-American War. And as it turns out, one of these yellow journals, I think it was two actually. From the sound of it, it was two because I saw two different names, newspaper names. Now, I didn't see the World or Journal in those names. I saw a New York Evening Post and I saw, I believe, the New York Tribune, but they could have been covering what was happening. So these New York journals decided to pull a stunt by saying that there were letters found of that uncovered and exposed a conspiracy to mutiny, that the soldiers were going to mutiny. But there were also, these letters also talked about just terrible, terrible actions that our American soldiers did over in the Philippines. Y- You know, like burning down villages, doing terrible things to the women, and all of that. Now, guess what? Those letters don't exist. Made them up. Hmm. So here's our soldiers. Now, I've read about what happened over there. Now, some of our soldiers actually fought in wars over here. So they were already shell-shocked like crazy, and they're fighting over there. They have no idea that this is happening or being accused of the most disgusting, vile things possible. You have their families over here hearing about these soldiers doing these terrible things. This is beyond, beyond vile to sell a couple papers. And then, now, the New York Sun was not part of this. And somewhere along the line, these yellow journals tried to throw not just the New York Sun, but another newspaper, like a couple other newspapers, under the bus who actually did research on the articles before printing them. There is one that I have that two newspapers did not check their sources before putting them to print, and they got called out. But and the New York Sun was like, "No, we're not playing that game. You are not going to mix me in this. Okay, you're not doing that right now." And he and the New York Sun full blown exposed he, whoever the journalist was or the owner or whoever just had it. I'm getting upset, man. I just because it's you know, let me be honest here. It doesn't matter if it's the military or if it were a child's football game or what have you. This is I can't even to make up such terrible, terrible things. These letters that the soldiers wrote saying that they were planning the uh-uh. I could not believe it when I found that. But it gets worse. No, excuse me, I'm sorry. So the two newspapers that I said didn't check their sources. Let me get this here. So this is the Daily Intermountain. I believe this is July 28th. Yeah, July 28th. So this is towards the end of the strike. And this is in Montana, if I remember correctly. And so a few months ago, the Anaconda Standard and the Helena Independent, they are both political papers, just to give you an idea. I saw them quite a bit. I was going through my search. uh, were filled with editorial references to the alleged bloodthirsty acts of the American soldiery in the Philippines. Okay. Long editorial sermons appeared deploring the savagery which the Republican Party called war. These Let's see, let's go down. Yeah, right here. One of the most bitter all-around liars in the field of sensational journalism is the New York Evening Post, from whence came most of the lurid stories of American outrages upon the God-fearing Filipino. So that tells you right there. I mean, newspapers across the country just we're done. Okay. I mean, here I am 125 years later. This is shit. You check your sources. The New York Sun called them out. Now, I do want to say that this was being investigated since April and May. And because the letters were found, I think, in April, and then in May, they continued to investigate because I was trying to track it down after I found this article. And again, this article is in July because after finding it, I was like, well, what exactly happened? Not that I really wanted to read exactly the things that were being discussed wherever. Okay. So, New York Evening Post apologized. Now, this is a non-apology. Okay. So, here's a non-apology from 1899. You thought that they were just YouTubers that did it. No, here we go. So, here's a non-apology. If we place too much faith in the veracity and importance of some of the letters at the time of their publication, and thereby did injustice to the humanity and character of our soldiers, we regret it sincerely. Bullshit. You got caught. Those were not written by soldiers. You did it so that you could sell papers. I mean, I'm getting mad at somebody that's dead now. Is this newspaper still going? I don't know. Because there's some newspapers that are still going from like the 1700s, so I'm just curious. For we should much prefer to believe that an occasional American soldier is a liar than to believe that the American army is composed of barbarians. Again, throwing the American soldiers under the bus because of something, a stunt that they pulled to sell papers. The American army has no idea that this is going on. They don't. And I feel bad for the families, and I'm glad that the newspapers are stepping up and saying, cut it out. This is unacceptable. But I love the the ruthless burn that follows. Okay, it says, as the Post made an apology, it is now in order for the Standard and the Independent to likewise retract the statements which they gave to the public with editorial approval concerning the alleged crimes of the American soldier, which never happened. The Post lays the blame upon the ability of an American soldier to lie occasionally about such things, and our local contemporaries might let themselves down as easily as possible by the bootstraps by laying it all to their regular sources of information, the disreputable yellow journals of the East. Will they do it? It's like, yeah, but this was, let me give you another example. They actually went after a priest. Let me show you when they went after a priest. No, no, no. Before we look at the priest. Okay, so this whole thing, because I think it's in my notes. Yes, it is. So this whole thing regarding the soldiers, their little stunt of faking a mutiny and all that stuff. Secretary of War during this time, Russell Alger. Well, of course, he's in freak out mode. He's like, okay, what do I do? So he was taking action to try and figure out what to do and to try and get this all smoothed out. And I was trying to find what exactly he did at this time. Okay. Now, I'm not sure because I looked up Russell Alger. I wasn't very familiar with Russell Alger. He's from Michigan. He fought in the war, very political based. I mean, his career is politics. And I'm not sure why the Yellow Journals hated him so much, but boy, did they hate him. As it said, this is a Portland Daily Press. This is July 22nd. And and at this point, Alger is deciding to resign. All right, he's going to step down from his position. And it he's being harassed basically by these yellow journals. I saw it. Going through, this is another one where I had to look back further, just like with the soldiers where I found those articles about the fake letters. I was seeing his name quite a bit, and the yellow journals were same thing. They were faking stuff about him. Like, dude, he's an old man. He looks like an old grandpa. He's he's got that look. I'll put a picture here of him. Like you would see in the cartoons where it's like the thick beard here and then the he seems like a nice, probably not in real life. He wasn't a nice guy, but who knows? It sounds like he did his job. From the sound of it, President McKinley was fine with him until all of a sudden the uh the yellow journals were constantly saying that he wasn't doing his job. There's this problem, that problem, this. Well, yeah, that would aggravate anybody. Just like I said with Hearst, when he was demonizing, how long did we hate uh yeah, for getting into the lifeboat. It turns out he was helping people into the lifeboat before he jumped in. Hearst wasn't there. Anyway, so this article, again, it was a Portland, yeah, the Portland Daily Press, and that's Portland, Maine. Uh, so there seems to be a difference of opinion among the experts as to the exact reason why Secretary Alger's resignation was called for just at this time, for it is very evident that his resignation was not an entirely voluntary act on the secretary's part. Yeah, no shit. He didn't want to go, but you're making him go. I love the word vomit that comes out of these people sometimes. Okay. The Washington correspondent of the Boston Journal holds the opinion that it was the Pingree episode that brought about the crisis. Okay, the Pingree episode is nothing more than okay. So Alger was governor of Michigan or mayor of Michigan, I think. Anyway, he held office in Michigan, and then 10 years later, Pingree held the same position in well, these pinheads, these yellow journal pinheads, are making it a big deal. It's just two people from Michigan sitting in the same room. That's not a thing, but they were making it a thing. Because I couldn't find anything. I looked everywhere, couldn't find where there was like an incident or an episode or anything like that. From what I was seeing, Pingree was perfect for the job. When he was in office, he was doing a lot of good things. This is so. bogus. Anyway, this is the kind of damage that I'm talking about and why it's being called out and why people sided with Kid Blink and his crew. I mean, if I'm getting pissed off 125 years later, that should tell you everything. I'm not even a political person, okay? I'm just looking at it from another, like from the sidelines. Really, I'm not a political person at all. I'm just looking at, they're picking on an old man. The fact that they're mad because two people from the same state are standing in a room together, why is that a problem? I mean, look, if I'm missing something, fine. Tell me in the comments section. I would love to hear it. That's why I keep the comment section open. If you know the history behind this, honestly, tell us. I mean, if there was something that, like a scandal behind Pingree, I couldn't find it. Um, yeah, tell us. And if there was something like a like a slap fight between these two and I'm just not seeing it, then yeah, tell us. But I couldn't find anything. I just think that this is a whole thing. This is like a smear campaign with the Yellow Journals. Like I said, Pulitzer mainly focused on the politics of it, and here's politics. If he doesn't like Al Gore for one reason or another, he's going to bury him. Seems to be doing a good job right now. Okay, so this Boston Journal fella says, then came the Pingree episode. No sooner was the Michigan alliance announced than the president saw that it would be politically embarrassing for Al Gore to remain in the cabinet, and every day's development since has confirmed him in this belief. How? Two guys from the same state, how is that a problem? From what I understand, that has happened before to this point. What the fuck are you talking about? God, this is pissing me off so much. I don't think the president had a problem with this. It's just, like I said, I know what yellow journalism is. It's just really annoying. How is it politically embarrassing? Both of them were good at their jobs. Ugh, I'm so annoyed right now. And then it says letters came to him from all over the country urging him to let Al Gore go. You mean like the letters that the soldiers wrote? Yeah, let's take that into consideration. I don't believe that happened. I don't believe any letters were written. hmm And the reason for that is because uh, I'm not going to read the rest of what this person says because there was a senator who actually sided with Al Gore and was defending him. I saw him pop up quite a bit, and his name is Senator Hawley, spelled Hawley. And it says Senator Hawley, however, thinks it was the Yellow Journals that did it. Yeah, I agree 100% because I was seeing it in several different papers across America. They were all calling him out. They're picking on this old man. The attacks on General Alger, again, he fought in the Civil War, have been without cause, for the man has done equally as well as any human being could do. Fault has been found with this detail and that detail. Whole trains of cars were wanted at a moment's notice. Some wholesale house failed to furnish what was desired, and so it went. One complaint followed another, and the yellow journals picked up the cry and sold papers. The newspapers are looking for something to get up and tear their shirts about. Okay. So then this journalist continues with, we think the journal's explanation is altogether more probable than Hawley's. Al Gore's alliance with Pingree, considering the attitude of the latter, was an affront to the president and his administration, which the president had good reason to complain of. Okay, But the fact that you say that the journal's explanation, the journal is yeah, that says it all. Why would I even listen to you after that? Senator Hawley knows what's up. He sees right through the crap. So Al Gore resigned and they continue to harass him. It's like you got what you wanted and you can't leave this old man alone. Fuck me, man. What? Okay, whatever. And there was a this like Mosby, I think his name was John Mosby or Jason Mosby or something like that. And he claimed that Al Gore had this vendetta against him, this personal vendetta against him. And historians pretty much concluded, because all these stories that he was telling, the guy apparently fought in the war, but the problem is that none of his stories connected. So yeah, that's another one that is just like, yeah, sure, whatever. All right, another crazy person. Probably one of those where it saw Al Gore's name in the paper and decided he would get 15 minutes of fame using that person's. How many times has that happened over the centuries? Now, here's another thing that the yellow journalists would do. I mean, quite honestly, you're better off writing a fiction book if you're going to pull this shit. So I saw, and I'll put it here. I'm not going to bother looking for it, but um, there was an article talking about this diamond mine, and I think it was in Alaska. But this diamond mine didn't exist. However, the location that it talked about was in a very dangerous area. Well, of course, people were going to go treasure hunting looking for this diamond mine. I mean, who didn't want to find diamonds and, get rich? The article that I found talked about people getting lost and getting injured and even dying. So, as far as I'm concerned, those yellow journals have blood on their hands when you're talking about that. Why not write a fiction book about a diamond mine where people go and, yeah, search for their fame? There was another one where there was, people wanted to see this cattle rancher who was like this amazing cattle rancher. The people had no clue who this person was. So like these yellow journals will talk about this like this superhero cattle rancher and other reporters would go to talk to this individual, stepped into places like a saloon or a bank or whatever, and people were like, I've never heard of that person. What are you talking about? Again, you're better off writing a book. Write about this superhero cattle rancher. What are you doing? This is pathetic. Now, during 1899, there was the kissing bug epidemic. For some reason, kissing bugs came back kind of like locusts. In fact, there was I wish I'd kept it, but there was a little blurb where somebody said, for as many kissing bugs as there are, you would think that it was the plagues of Egypt. I'm just waiting for Moses to come and uh, part the waters. Well, here's the thing, is in 1899, the kissing bug was not new. It had been around for a century before that. But for some reason, they just decided, kind of like, I guess it, um, on the East Coast, there's a beach that has a whole bunch of locusts everywhere in America. Here in America, there's a bunch of least I think it's America. Anyway, I saw a clip of it. I don't know where exactly it was, but there was a beach that had a whole bunch of locusts or grasshoppers. Just, it's like, nope, don't want to go to the beach now. But, here's the problem is, and this is Wheeling Daily Intelligencer, July 24th. So this is towards the middle of of the uh of the strike with Kid Blink. So the scientists were so pissed because it was causing mass hysteria. This bug was not poisonous. And the more that the scientists would come out and try to explain that it wasn't poisonous, the more stories that you would find of people saying stuff like, well, my arm fell off. The This bug wiped out my livestock. These farmers talking about how the bug wiped out their livestock, and or they talked about the giant size of the bug. I just fought off this giant, stuff that you would see in those 50s horror movies. It's like, fuck off with that. Um, yeah, the kissing bug scare. The insect is not poisonous, nor is it a new bug. Now, this doctor is talking about how it, let's see, where is it? Where is it? Which has been treated to the usual newspaper exploitation and sensation mongering and has been dignified by the daily press, uh, the kissing bug plague. In the parlance of yellow journalism, the kissing bug, which they would lead their readers to believe is an entirely new creature, presumably discovered by some enterprising reporter, is none other than the well-known scientific words of the subfamily scientific word. Perhaps an occasional reader of these sensational accounts of serious illness and even of death from the bite, they don't bite, of this insect has stopped to wonder how it has come to this species. With its, yeah, these yellow journals were talking about how it had like some superpower and everything. Oh, geez. So, yeah, they had to come out and had to explain the kissing bug. There were several articles I saw where it would actually have pictures of the kissing bug next to other bugs. Just, it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And I mean, like, it's one thing. Okay, so in the 30s, Orson Welles, there was that famous radio show where he read War of the Worlds. And of course, people got scared and thought that the world really was ending. Well, here's the difference. Okay. Here's the difference is people knew that story. It was a well-known story. It was a new concept of radio and reading off the story, having the sound effects and everything, story. They didn't know audiobooks. This was an idea of audiobooks. Having all of that and hearing it for the first time, right. Okay. Put that into perspective. Okay. You're hearing it for the first time, the sound effects, all of it. Okay. Brand new. We've been surrounded by it our whole lives, even myself. Now, the kissing bug had been around already for a century. And these yellow journals are trying to like set up mass hysteria. Yeah, that's the problem. So how did yellow journals affect the strike? Well, you think about it. The general public were sick of having to speak out against the yellow journals. And I'll give you the perfect example, like I said, um with the priest. Because these yellow journals weren't correcting themselves, or when they did, they threw people under the bus, like the soldiers who had no idea that that was happening. Be like, oh yeah, soldiers lie. It's like, no, you were the liar. So this is the Sun. It was July 29th, so 2 days, 3 days. Anyway, it's towards the end of the strike. My math is not mathing right now. So this is Father Brady, and he had to put out a statement because misinformation was printed about him. Now, again, there are a lot of strikes going on right now at this time, concerning, I mean, like, it wasn't just the Newsy strike, there was a messenger boy strike, there were clothing strikes going of several different kinds, bricklayer strike, fisherman strikes, railroad strikes, you name it. Okay. So, Reverend Brady, it says here, made this statement yesterday for the purpose of correcting some misstatements which were printed in the yellow journals. It is not true, as stated in some of the New York papers, that I have been visited by a committee from New York asking me to moderate my views concerning strikes as a remedy for the evils which beset the laboring man. It has been stated that I was requested by the officials of the railroad company to exert my influence to suppress the strike. This is not true. No official of the railroad company asked me to impose. I exerted myself of my own free will without any solicitation whatsoever, and I did so because the vast majority of the men engaged in the impending strike of last Wednesday belong to the parish which I am interested. I saw no result from the violent action, but complete disaster and calamity to the men and their families. And being interested in the welfare of the man, I considered it my duty to interest myself in their behalf. In other words, considering that these strikers were part of his parish, he went to their house to see if they were all right. But the Yellow Journals decided to twist it up in a knot and lie about a priest. And that's what I mean. People were sick of this. I would be. So when these kids went on strike, of course they're going to side with them. We're done. Pulitzer and Hearst had lost their popularity at that point. And what's really frustrating is that they continued to lie as the strike was going, as if nothing was happening. They continued to post these fiction stories. I don't know if it was like they figured that by posting it, they would receive popularity again. No, they were pissing people off even more. Why would people side with you when you're attacking the general public, basically? Yeah, so I think this had a big effect on the strike. People were getting hurt. I mean, you're sending them on those treasure hunts to fictional places, or the reporters are going to see these people that don't exist, making them look like fools. Just write a book. You'll get more money that way. That's the part that doesn't get me. You're causing mass hysteria over a thing that has existed for a long time. It was found a long time ago and all of that. You have caused problems politically. And the soldiers, I really feel for those soldiers' families. I can't imagine what that was like. It just so so that's Yellow Journals. The Yellow Journals were basically the World and Journal Pulitzer and Hearst newspaper. There were like two others. I saw New York Evening Post and then one other one. And the fact that newspapers all over America were calling them out. They were doing their detective work and saying, quit it. I mean, they were being exposed by their own industry. And for some reason, Pulitzer and Hearst couldn't stop. They were still doing it. This one with Father Brady is towards the end of the strike. No wonder. I said it before and I'll say it again. No wonder people were siding with the kids. I would. I would want to stick it to Pulitzer and Hearst. I so that's the first part of this. Because now I want to look at the actual strike that was going, the kids involved and some other stuff. So we're going to take a break. All right. So now that we know about yellow journalism, the yellow journals, how it affected the strike that was going on in 1899, how about we look at the actual strike? Now, one thing I want to look at, um, oh dear. Um, because this is a problem that happens, uh, is that when we become fans of movies, I said this in um, in one of my podcast episodes, is that when we become fans of something, we tend to absorb it and decide that that's the truth and everything. And this is another instance, is where even though we're researching, we become history detectives and all that. We're looking for the information. Oftentimes, what we'll do is we'll start spouting off information, but that information is not true. And so I want to talk about stuff that I have been told, and unfortunately, I have to contradict it because I will show the truth of the matter, or just downright truth. Um, one of the things that I was told, and I should have contradicted it then, but I was so confused as to why this person was saying it. One of those things where Brian Regan says it best, the me monster, except this is history where they keep talking about it and so confident about it. And it's like, what? You didn't like that other like that one article where it says checking the sources. You, you didn't do that? So I was told that the strike in 1899 established newsstands in America. Now, I don't know if they were talking about establishing newsstands in New York or America, but that is a lie. That's just not true because during the strike, there were news kids who had newsstands. In fact, there is an article talking about a news girl named Squealer who got into an altercation with a bunch of newsboys. And after the fight, they fixed her newsstand. If that, if what this person said were true, she wouldn't have a newsstand. Squealer wouldn't have a newsstand. Okay. Truth of the matter is that I even know for a fact that what this person said was not true because when I was in middle school, this was in my history book. Like Luke Skywalker says, your overconfidence is your weakness. Look, I'm not here to brag about finding stuff to debunk what other people say. I don't like doing that. It's just a matter of double checking your sources. If the point of you being a historian or history detective is to be overconfident and brag about the information that you found, well, maybe you need to find another profession. Okay. That's not why we're here. You know, it's great that people are documenting a moment in history that would have been long forgotten to history. If it had not been for the 1992 musical, it would have been forgotten forever. But the truth of the matter is that if you're going to start spouting off misinformation and lie, don't do that. Don't give the strike more credit than it deserves. It's great that Kid Blink and his crew went up against Pulitzer and Hearst, but come on. Because I got to tell you something. France built that news kiosk. It's still there. And are you really going to tell me that it took 50 years before America said, oh, I want that. I want a newsstand. I want a news kiosk. It, America's reputation is that whenever another country has this new invention, a new thing, a new cool, whatever, they gotta have it. I mean, when the flapper trend was going, it took 5 to 10 years for America to jump on it. Yeah, I don't believe it. Okay, so stop. All right. Now the next thing that I want to talk about, this actually surprised me. Now, I want to make this clear. Okay, when I research, because I don't think I talked about it in the last section. Okay, so I'm going to confirm it here and now, is that when it comes to the Newsy strike of 1899, I don't research it that much. If you were to look at my laptop, I don't have a folder for it. All right. When I was a teenager, I did. I had several folders for it. It's an understatement, really. Oh my gosh. Um, I think the last time I researched anything having to do with the strike was probably 2 years ago. There's other moments in history that I care about right now. I just I just I'm sorry. Just because I like the movie doesn't mean that I'm going to continue researching the living daylights out of this moment in history. Just I'm really going to drop a bombshell here, and just because I like Gladiator does not mean that I'm going to research the living daylights out of Gladiator history. I don't really know that much about gladiatorial history. I, I really don't. Unless they look like Russell Crowe, I don't care. So there you go. All right. So that's where I don't, I mean, like right now I'm researching the Seattle Newsboy Union and one other piece of history and kind of. Because with everything going on in my private life, history's kind of an afterthought right now. If you were to look at my laptop right now, I have folders on video games that I'm playing and my manuscripts and like a couple other things, the silent films and one other thing. That's it. Sorry, adulting comes first. Talking about video games, yeah. So that's where I'm at. All right. I feel like I have to explain myself, and I really shouldn't have to. Anyway, so yeah, last time I researched anything having to do with the 1899 strike that Newsies is about, it was like 2, 3 years ago. So, and it just happened that that article kind of kickstarted. I was like, well, okay, I'll just kind of look around since I'm at it. And all right. I have all respect for the people that are researching to high heaven and documenting. I think it's great because again, it would have been it almost was lost to high heaven. So all credit to them. If it sounds like I'm making fun of them or even attacking them, no, this is just me talking as a historian. So anyway, so this bit of history, getting back to this bit of history about the strike, about knocked me out of my chair. I mean, eh, fans of the film talk about Joseph Pulitzer and how he was perfectly portrayed in the movie. Look, nothing against Robert Duvall because he did a great job in the movie. He really, really did. And but the truth of the matter is that by 1899, Joseph's son Ralph had taken over because Joseph's uh illnesses had the dude was sick, man. I mean, he just but here's the thing. I found this article talking about how Joseph was in London. He'd been in London for several weeks. Now, this particular article, as I bring it up, um, it was, oh, let's see. Give me a second. There it is. It's the Waterbury Evening Democrat on August 1st. Okay. So, oh, for Pete's sake. There we go. So he wasn't in New York at the time of the strike. Like, not at all. I, what? Now, I did find an article where it said that who, let's see, the Daily Kennebec Journal on July 21st said that he was leaving for his mansion over in Maine. I don't think that's true. And the reason that I say that is because in June, Ralph Pulitzer had been in London, made quite an impression. All right. And yeah, there were several articles in June talking about Ralph Pulitzer being in London. So they really liked him over there. Now, again, there were a lot of strikes before Kid Blink went on strike against Pulitzer and Hearst. Um, the Messenger Boys, clothing strikes, railroad strikes, trolley strikes, bricklayer strikes, fishing, fishermen strikes, you name it. And so I would believe, again, this is total theory on my part, but I would believe that Ralph, because of his dad being so riddled with illness and everything, told his dad, you know what, I can take care of everything here. Y- The best place to go for rest and relaxation, because there's so many, I mean, there's like the Kensington Garden, you can go there. Go to London, relax, just go. And so I would believe that he was in London during this time. Even if Joseph Pulitzer was in Maine, it doesn't matter. He wasn't in New York at that time. But see, here's why I say I don't believe he was in Maine is because this particular article was run by several. I kept seeing it in several different places, not just uh, this particular newspaper, the Democrat newspaper. So that tells me that he did go to London for several newspapers to post Pulitzer's whereabouts. It tells me that, yeah, he was there because when Ralph Pulitzer was in London, I found several newspapers posting about him being there back in June of 1899. So, and unfortunately, poor Joseph Pulitzer did not have a good time. The English army had a bugler that was getting on his nerves, and the peacocks were squawking like crazy. Poor dude, he just wanted silence. He was not getting it. But but this is the thing, is that because the strike officially ended on the second, and this article ran on August the 1st, this one that I found anyway. Either way, it was towards the end. So he was on his way home when the strike ended. Um, so technically, if the movie were correct, we should have seen Hearst. Now, again, not taking away from uh, Robert Duvall's performance, because it was good, but I mean, Pulitzer wasn't even there. And again, that surprised me because I thought. Now, when I talked about, you know, when I did the video talking about the fire, he wasn't there either. He and one of his sons weren't at home either. So that should have connected something, but I just never, it just, you don't really think of that. And so yeah, that was a shock to the system for me. He wasn't even there. I would have thought at least, well, you just kind of figure he was there anyway, but whatever. Now, what was Hearst doing during this time? Let's look at Hearst. Uh, oh yeah, he was having a good old time. So let's see. At the beginning of the strike, let's see, where is he? So this is the San Francisco Call. Oh, this is the middle of the strike, towards the middle. Anyway, uh, yeah, San Francisco Call, July 23rd. Okay, and let me bring it up here. And hooted by newsboys. Editor Hearst's unpleasant experience with young strikers. Okay, I have a feeling that Hearst had a big dick complex or a little dick complex, I think is what they call. And because and the reason I say that is because he feels like a big shot in his office, but then when he's out of his office and walking the streets, yeah, I need an adult. I need an adult. And this is a perfect example. Yeah, I guess the real term is small dick syndrome. So the Newsboys strike against the World and Journal promise to be successful. Popular sympathy is with the boys who have placarded the city asking the public not to buy yellow journals. The police interfere only when the youthful strikers attempt violence but do not tear down the notices posted up. The newsboys stop World and Journal wagons on Broadway and scatter papers all over the street. They snatch yellow journals from the hands of pedestrians. Boy, do they ever. I have a funny story I'll mention in a minute. The World and Journal employ men at $2 a day to sell papers. We'll talk about that in a second here. So William Randolph Hearst was in Herald Square tonight attempting to buy a copy of the Evening Telegram. He was soon surrounded by a great mob of boys who hooted him, and for a while it looked as if they might attack him. I don't believe that. I'm sure they were razzing him. It was just like when I was living in Seattle and you saw Bill Gates. He he would always talk about how people were harassing him. There was a burger joint, I don't know if it's still there, but it was called Dick's Burgers. Great burgers, but he would go there all the time. And the thing is that he would always tweet about how people were giving him a hard time and everything. People didn't care that he was there. I remember going there one time and he was there and it was me and a couple of friends and there were two other people over here and he talked about how this big mob had come up to him and he felt like his life was in danger. It's like he got called out for that because we didn't care. The other two people that were there were on their phones and didn't even address him. We could care less. We were busy talking about our class and what we needed to get for supplies. We didn't even address him. And yet he's talking like his life was in. I have a feeling that's the same thing that happened here. They weren't going to attack him. But I do think that because they're teenage kids, little to up to 20-year-old, they knew who he was. They weren't scared of him. Okay, he says he finally made his escape, followed by the howling strikers. Yeah, I'm sure they were saying things like, "Ooh, big man," that kind of thing. Like I said, he was, in his office, he's a big shot. But out on the streets, I need an adult. Okay, so this World and Journal employ men at $2 a day to sell papers. The math is not mathing on this. All right, the reason that Kid Blink and his group of newsies went on strike, okay, they were working for Pulitzer and Hearst to sell papers. Now, Spanish-American War, the price had actually gone up because papers were selling like crazy. People wanted to know about the war. Once the and all newspapers were doing it, right? When the war was over, all these other newspapers dropped it back down. Pulitzer and Hearst couldn't seem to do that. They had their heads up their ass. All right. And um, so when these kids asked, "Can you bring it down?" They said, "Absolutely not. Not for you, snot-nosed brats. What do you think? Who do you think we are?" And they said, "Okay, you want to fight? We'll fight." And that's what they did. All they were asking for was 10 cents lower. And bring it back down to what it originally was. And so here's where the math is just not mathin'. First of all, you're losing papers because the kids were tearing up these papers like crazy. They would print the papers, take them out, and the World and Journal papers were being torn up like crazy. They weren't being sold. Okay. And like it says here, um, yeah, scatter papers all over the streets. They would snatch the yellow journals from the hands of pedestrians and do the same thing, tear them up. And but again, you're employing people to sell these papers at $2 a day, which weren't selling. I have several articles where the kids were watching these guys, keeping an eye on them. They didn't do anything to these guys. And yeah, they didn't fight these guys. They but they kept an eye on them. And what's the point? So 10 cents, lowering it to 10 cents again, and now you're paying $2 to a bunch of men to sell these papers simply because you can't drop your ego down. You're losing money. Oh gosh. It- okay. Makes so much sense, I guess. In their minds, it made sense. Oh my gosh. So that was on, let's see, yeah, the San Francisco, that was July 23rd. But Hearst, July 29th, 2 days or however many days, I don't know. I don't care anymore. The Jersey City News quoted Hearst. Mr. Hearst, whose papers are the great backers of strikers in general, is quoted as telling a representative of the striking newsboys who have been starving on the sales of his miserable sheet. Again, the papers had had it. They knew that he was the reason for these made-up stories on his miserable sheet that he would go out of business and close up the shop before he would consent to allowing them a living profit. It makes a difference whose ox is gored. Man, that's a burn. I mean, in all honesty, and the papers even point this out, both the kids and uh, uh, Pulitzer and Hearst were losing money on this strike. But Hearst and Pulitzer were losing more because of the resilience of the kids. They had suffered strikes before, but not like this. This was, and part of it had to do with their, like I said, people were done with these fake stories. Yellow journalism was known, the sensational headlines and everything, but well, I said it before. Okay. And eventually the journal went belly up. So pretty bad when your words come back at you. Okay. So that's what Hearst was doing. It's funny how your words come back to haunt you. Yeah, in that sense. Um, Now, the there was somebody that told me they're like, oh yeah, the Newsies continued to sell during the strike. Now, considering all of the actions that I saw of the kids, throwing newspapers in the river and tearing up everything, all these papers of the World and Journal, I'm thinking, where the hell did you get that? Okay, she wasn't wrong. All right. Especially when it came to the story about Squealer, uh, because she was allowed to sell other papers, not the World and the Journal. And that's when I did some more research. It turns out that kids were selling other papers that weren't considered redhead. Okay, so redhead papers are boycotted papers, and they were considered redhead. They were named redhead, named after the red paper hornet. I think that's creative. But when I first saw that, I'm like, okay, is that like what is that? And I wasn't finding it, so I kept looking it up, and then I saw red paper hornet. I was like, okay, that would make sense. So they would have terms like yellow paper, yellow journal, and the redhead paper. So those three terms, but basically any paper that they were up against or striking against, you couldn't sell. You could sell the others. Those were fine. Um, so like the Squealer, uh, she could sell. Now, if we were to take a look at some others that were selling, yeah, because I was hoping to go through this in order, but you know what? Let's not. There were some elderly newsies, mainly news ladies, and because there's this article from the New York Tribune, and there's Mrs. Shea. I'll have her up here. That's going to be me in 10 years. Yeah. And then Mrs. Fenton and Mrs. Shea worked from the sound of it, she worked near the end of the bridge up. It said Park Row. Again, I've never when I was in New York, it was like a pass through kind of a deal. I was going through something. And it was like I was at the bus sta I rode the bus, got there, and then crossed the bridge, slept overnight, and then I was I was leaving for somebody else's house. So kind of an overnight deal. So there's this um paragraph and it talks about getting your nickname. So it's not like you get to choose it, the group chooses it for you. And it says, as soon as a boy has bought, fought, or found his way into the profession, his associates size him up, study his traits and peculiarities, and if he has the elements of popularity, he soon receives a nickname. Otherwise, you just use your name from the sound of it. Even the women who play no small part in the newsboys' circles have their nicknames, and Mrs. Shea, whose portly form takes up valuable space in Park Row near the bridge, is often addressed by a name which is powerful in financial circles. Yeah, but they don't say what it is because she is said to be awful rich. Uh, Mrs. Cochran is addressed as Auntie, Mrs. Myers is Beauty, and Old Hannah Clef is meant when the boys call fight. But Hannah's all right, and so is Annie Kelly, said a striking newsboy. The Union men for fair. Okay. These Union men for fair, but some of the others got money to burn, but are scabs just the same. Which I'm not sure where he got that, considering some of the articles that I read. Um, especially Mrs. Shea. She's a feisty old lady, I'll tell you that. Couldn't find much on Mrs. Fenton, but Mrs. Cochran, Mrs. Cochran and Mrs. Shea hate each other. I think they're the two that are very territorial, and that's what it sounds like to me. The article, I found like two different articles, and Mrs. Shea and Mrs. Cochran hate each other. And from the sound of it, they're fighting about their territories. Mrs. Shea attacks the Newsies, who, like, she's a get off my lawn kind of lady. She has no problem going to jail. There was, and I think she's the one that was hiding papers under her dress. So when this kid is saying that there are scabs, it sounds like she was part of the cause, going, all for and uh getting rid of the world and the journal for the cause. Yeah, let me find that article. Where there is it? There's another one, and it had several other names of older ladies. It mentioned Mrs. Myers and like I said, several others I can't remember, but I wish uh I have it saved, but I don't have it in the format that I need to actually read it. So and I don't want to go through the process. So right here live. Let's see. The newswomen loyally took up the cause too, and Mrs. Cochran joined hands with her old enemy, Mrs. Shea, in refusing to sell worlds or journals. So they had stands. They had newsstands where they were. But the ancient lady who divides her time between selling evening extras at the bridge entrance and fighting with the small boys who infringe on what she considers her rights of location got into trouble yesterday. Sounds like Mrs. Shea. Uh, Yesterday morning for disregarding the provisions of the strike. Yeah, through this particular article, because this is also the article with the squealer, they were talking about the rules and regulations of the strike, and this is when the big riot is going on. It was like the riot at the bridge was an entire day. Okay. And I'm sitting here thinking, during a riot, rules and regulations be damned. Okay. I felt bad for Squealer because the it goes both ways actually, because she was going to go ahead and which I love why she's called Squealer. Let me see. Let's back that up a little bit. She goes by that name because when exasperated, she charges with a war cry like that of an enraged elephant. So she's a screamer. And and she had every intention of buying journals. The strikers found out, and 30 of them went after her. I think she was enticing. Okay. Now they had a rule that they weren't going that you don't hit a girl, but she she went ahead and she attacked this boy, and then she got dogpiled and she got pantsed. I do feel sorry for her because she ran off crying. And what did they do? They took her garments, put them on sticks, and were parading around. They did come to a decision that she not sell the red papers, the redheads, and they'll give back her garments. And but further down it says there was a comparative quiet along Park Row at night when, with sporadic outbursts, where some newswoman or one of the bigger boys undertook to break the union rules. Yeah, it's a riot. Nobody cares. Again, when you're rioting, it doesn't matter. About 8 o'clock, the newsboys at the bridge observed the imposing figure of a 14-year-old youth wearing pink suspenders approaching from the Brooklyn side. In movies, especially like Indiana Jones, where it has like the light coming and there's like this silhouette, this of this figure. It's like they're trying to make that appearance of a 14-year-old kid wearing pink suspenders. It's not pink, it's lightish red. Oh, now I want to watch Red versus Blue. The problem with that series was at some point it got so weird. Like the show was silly anyway, but there was a point where it was weird to the point of, do you even know what you're doing with the series now? I think we can all agree that the best was when what's his name was on the phone. He's like, because we all have that frustration. We get that rage. He's like, press one. Oh, press this number. I will stab you, phone lady. Okay, so this pink suspenders kid approaching from the Brooklyn side. He asked for General Master Workboy Blind Diamond, to whom he introduced himself as Spot Conlon. Spot has made his entrance. This is a better entrance than the one in the movie. I said it. Oh my gosh. Oh. So he's 14 and has lightish red suspenders. And he's the district master work boy of the Brooklyn Union. I want to see it on a name tag. Oh my gosh. Okay, I have a bug in my room, so I just saw him right there, probably a crane fly or something. So just bear with me. If you see a shadow somewhere, it's the shadow. It's 3 in the morning. Me giggling about everything. That's what it is at this point. Okay. So Blind Diamond is General Master Workboy, and Spot Conlon is District Master Workboy of the Brooklyn Union. He's got a bigger title. I don't think that's fair. Master Workboy. That okay, whatever. I think it's funny though that because when I read a lot of these, I'll introduce you to the Jersey kids. The Jersey kids actually, the only reason they went on strike was to support their comrades in arms, the New York kids. I'm not even kidding. That's pretty much what they said. And but I love that the newspapers uh they they pretty much cater to this. But they talk about these titles. And so all right, so what does he say? Oh, he goes off in a oh he's okay, I have read the speech and he sounds it's like a Shakespearean William Wallace thing. So all right. I'm gonna I'm gonna read it instead of trying to decipher it, because it's the like New York accent thing. I'm gonna go ahead and read it in the accent and everything. Okay, we bring you greetings and promises of support, said he to the boys who quickly gathered around him. We have tied up the scab sheet so tight that you can't buy one for $1 in the street. Hold out, me gallant kids, and tomorrow I myself at the head of 3,000 noble hearts from Brooklyn will be over here to help you win your noble scrap for freedom and fair play. And of course, they're all cheering and everything. For freedom! And that's why he's the district master work boy of the Brooklyn Union. Oh, good heavens. With lightish red suspenders. He contradicts himself though, because he's walking back to Brooklyn and he says to somebody, "Oh, he is escorted back to Brooklyn by a guard of honor." These kids, man. And he says, "No violence, just give him a poke in the jaw and let it go at that." That's still violence, you dummy. Oh, is the motto of the union towards scab labor. No violence, just, what, you know, just sock him in the jaw. It was just a poke. Oh man, I love it. I absolutely love it. So that was Spot. And but I thought, see, I was told that it was Racetrack that had the suspenders. He had the red ones. And Spot had the lightish red ones. Again, it's 3 in the morning. Just bear with me, okay? Just at this point, yeah, everything's funny. Everything is awesome. It does talk here in this particular, but where are they in Manhattan? They gotta be. They gotta be in Manhattan. Unless he's walking in, he doesn't know where he is. He's walking all over the place. Park Row, Hogan's Alley, it doesn't matter. He's in New York. That's all I wasn't there. I don't know. Um, but it says that in Jersey, I'm gonna have New Yorkers hurting me a lot. They'd be like, "That's not funny." I'm sorry. Oh, good heavens. Oh. But it does say that in Jersey City, the wagons sent over from the city were surrounded by strikers as soon as they arrive on the other side of the river. And the boys would neither take any of the papers themselves or allow anyone else to buy them. Two or three boys who succeeded in getting a supply were attacked and their papers were taken away from them and torn up. And there was another wagon that was raided. a telephone message to the police captain, brought the reserves down to the ferry, and they drove the boys away, and none of the papers were sold. So let's look at the Jersey Boys. I'm okay, I'm telling you right now. There needs to be a comic strip, like one of those online comic strips of Slim Jim and Foxy Alec. These kids crack me up. I'm just, oh my gosh. So let's start with, oh, let's go ahead and let's see, is this the one? No, that's not it. That's not it. I have to maybe. Okay, so this is Jersey City News. It's on July 21st. And and it's called War to the Death. Newsies holds secret session on Ice Company dock. Let me get this. All right. The Newsboys strike is still on the Pennsylvania ferries, and the lads are confident that they will win and beat the 30-cent profit movement of the New York Yellow Journals. Now, they talk about an informant. Now, I'm not sure if he's remaining anonymous, not talking about this informant that follows the Jersey Boys. Um, if he's remaining anonymous for the paper or because he's like infiltrated and gained the confidence of the newsies. I'm kind of confused on that, or if it's like a little bit of both. I I don't know. But some in certain areas, the way that it's worded does make it confusing. Like here it says, Wynn said the news informant, who I guess it's Jersey City News, who, although small in stature, has risen to be a ringleader. It's easy, dead easy. Who's who is selling the papers today? Well, I guess not. Um, so from the sound of it, the informant, because I've read this a few times and I'm still kind of confused. You can explain it to me. I'm fine with that. Trust me, it won't hurt my feelings. Uh, it sounds like, it's a smaller individual. Um, like I'm 5'8" and my brother makes fun of me because I'm short. So, and and our mom is shorter than us. So, and I tell her all the time because I have a friend who my best friend one time I was trying to do something and she says, "Think tall thoughts." So I say that to my mom all the time and she says, I really wish that your friend hadn't said that to you." Oh gosh. Oh. So I'm guessing it's because of their size like that, maybe they're as tall as my mom and that's why. And and they were able to rise in the ranks like that. So, but when we get to the end, you'll see that it sounds like they know that this person is a news person. That's what's confusing about it. Anyway, we'll get to that. Yeah, it says Wynn said the news informant, who, although small in stature, has risen to be a ringleader. He graciously informed the newsman that the boys held a meeting early this morning. See, the wording is so weird. It's like they left something out. So it's I don't know. I think they meant to say something like the kid uh Wynn said so and so to the news informant. I think that's what happened, and they cut that out. Okay. I think I think that's what happened. Okay, so this kid graciously informed the newsman that the boys held a meeting early this morning. They had first thought of ma asking Mayor Hughes to grant them the use of the assembly chamber. Okay, so breaking it down, they wanted to meet up at this one place, and they objected on the grounds that when Messrs. Pulitzer and Hearst heard of it, they would send over people to pack the meeting, and where would the boys be? Sounds like they've been sabotaged before. You know, after a lively talk at the back of the traction company's car shed, it was decided to hold a meeting at the Hudson River Ice Company's dock at the foot of Morgan Street. And for two reasons. It was a hot day, and so they could refresh themselves on the ice blocks. And second, any scabs that try to come by, they could soak them in the river. So they get there, and this kid, Mickey Doolin, was made chairman. Now, Jim Hennessy, known as Slim Jim, was nominated for the secretary. Unfortunately, Slim Jim isn't illiterate. He didn't have pen, paper, pencil, any of that stuff. And like it says, he couldn't write if he had any of that stuff. So, poor Slim Jim. Then the little man who so graphically told the story in the news last night about the strike jumped up to talk. He is James Francis Turner Haggerty, a bright, amusing chap known among the boys as Foxy Alec. Okay, this is what I'm going to translate. So he's pointing towards New York and he says, boys, them guys think they'll do us. We didn't join to be done dirty by them lobsters, which I'm guessing that means hard shells. So he's calling Pulitzer and Hearst hard shells. It's the only thing that one made me think for a long time. Steam coming out my ears. If they send their wagons, we'll punch the stuffing out of them. With 30 cents for 100, we ain't going to be Astors in a week. Which is interesting that he says that because, and he does mean John Jacob Astor, the same gentleman who, because of the fact that I did find a letter, it was printed in the newspaper. Apparently, Joseph Pulitzer, contacted John Jacob Astor concerning the newspaper, like a partnership. Not, I don't want to say partnership, but I'll try and find it. But it was like some kind of sponsorship or something like that. And of course, not Pulitzer, John Jacob Astor turned him down and said, I graciously have to decline. So whatever Pulitzer had up his sleeve having to do with the Astors, they were just not having it. So a little odd. Um, I don't know. But so we're not going to be the Astors in a week. They don't need to be jealous. We're not this one was a little weird. We're not kicking again against the Jersey papers. Them's all right. Any boy won't who buys these others, we ought to plug them, and I'm game for one. And of course, everybody's cheering. And one of the boys, in enthusiasm, caused by the last speaker's efforts, applauding too vigorously, fell backwards over into the dock, and the meeting suddenly broke up to watch Danny Dwyer's display. So then they decided that they were going to go swimming. They swam for about an hour and then uh, got dressed and raced back to the ferry for the first unlucky wagon from New York. Yeah, the news representative encountered Foxy Alec at the ferry and from him received the account of what had taken place. Uh, the little fellow's face brightened when he said that the men were firm and meant to stand out until the yellow journal papers allowed them sufficient to make a decent living. I said that the news had me in it. Well, you can put a piece in the paper tonight that will win, and don't you forget it. And then he's asked, what's the next move? And Foxy says, lay low, and when the wagons come, soak 'em, he replied with a burst of laughter. I like Foxy. I like him even more. I have more on him. Let's see, here's Jersey City News, July 25th. I don't think he's in this one, but this shows uh, how much the Jersey kids are willing to go. It says, no surrender to the yellow papers is their war cry. And this got pretty violent. So Detective Holtick and several policemen had their hands full during the past few days in dispersing the crowds of angry newsboys at the junction. These determined vendors of papes had been waging the hottest kind of fight against the increase in the price of the yellow papers. A wagon loaded with journals and worlds reached the junction yesterday, and the driver attempted to dispose of his wares at the increased price. Fish Wilson, one of the leaders of the Newsies, spotted the enemy. A hasty conference was held, and in a minute, 15 youngsters made a rush for the wagon. Papers were hurled in all directions for a few minutes until the police caught sight of the infuriated boys. Then there was another wild scramble, and a dozen pairs of bare legs were seen flying around different corners. Get out! Run! They're after us. Oh man. Under the protection of the police, the driver gathered up some of the papers and drove off without having sold even a cent's worth. Well, of course, they're already scrambled up. Nobody wants them after that. When they've been all crinkly and all that, nobody, you know, people are fickle like that. It's so funny how when you see a paper all scrambled and crinkly and you don't want it anymore because it's like it's red. It's been molested by someone else's eyes. I'm telling you, I have seen this by my own grandparents from the time I was a little kid, bringing in the newspaper, and even though it would have, the regular crease that you expect, and then it would be folded over, no problem. Okay, the folds that they would put in there, not it didn't matter. But any other crinklies or anything like that, I don't want it. Don't give me that. I want a fresh new paper. It's like, get out of here with that. But everybody's like this. That's funny. And apparently they were back then too. Because the reason I say that is because there's instances of people still buying these boycotted papers. And the kids are snatching them out of these people's hands. Men, women, children, doesn't matter. So busted. All right. Oh, okay. As the wagon was passing down Grand Street, several heads were stuck out from behind corners and shouts of warning were hurled after the driver. He was threatened with violence if he dared come back with the papers unless the price was reduced. Well, okay. I do have to say this because that's unacceptable. I mean, yeah, I'm getting mad at kids that are, long since passed because this is 1899. But this is the thing is that when it comes to drivers, and because there was a whole thing when it came to the Bud Light boycott when it first happened, and people were going after the drivers. The drivers are just doing their job. Okay, and you can say to high heaven, well, they can leave and everything. No, they're trying to feed their family. Okay. Again, I'm not gonna, I don't like politics or anything like that. I'm not getting into the political side of it or anything. I'm looking at it from the point of view of the drivers are just doing their job. Okay. Okay. Done with it. Before I have people try and make it political, and I don't like politics. Anyway, uh, so a news reporter is asking, well, boys, how is the strike getting along? Asked a news reporter for a number of newsboys who were, okay, so they're congregating. There's nothing doing now, but we heard that the World and the Journal is going to send blokes over with sheets and pay them $2 a day. So this is what I mean. The kids knew, because I talked about in the last section, the kids knew that these people were being hired. Okay, so let's see what they have to say. Pay $2 a day and sell them, besides letting them make 40 cents on 100 papers, answered. So they were making 40 cents. So they were making the 40 cents, according to this kid. That was a regular price, wasn't it? Because they wanted it down to 30 cents. Okay, had to do the math there real quick. Answered the leader. Are you going to put up with that kind of business? The boys were then asked. Uh, one mischievous kid said, I don't think. I like that kid. And another kid said, just let the blokes come over and they won't get a thing done to them. Uh, Another one said, we'll wait down at the ferry for the blokes and take the papers away from them and throw them in the river. This is practically the latest position in the Newsboys strike against the World and the Journal evening editions. The boys heard this morning that the two boycotted papers were about to hire men at $2 a day and spread them out all over the Hudson County. So it goes on to say that the boys are going to have a meeting about this. But so it sounds from what those three kids were saying, we'll just take their papers. We're not going to hurt them. And yeah, and threatening violence against the driver. I said what I needed to say. But and it's not just that instance. I've seen it happen other times. Just because somebody is in the employ of a boycotted thing, that's no excuse. I've seen it so many times over the years where people think that because they're in the employ, anyway. Okay, so where is that one where they have their parade? Yeah, it's this one. Oh, I think it's a moth. I wish it would settle down. There's a big old spider next to. Yeah, just settle down under there. Oh my gosh, like I was saying as I'm waiting for this to come up, there was a we put an air conditioner in my room. And ever since then, there's been little spiders coming around the window and everything, which you expect, it doesn't bother me so much. But there was like this big spider that suddenly started crawling across, and too smart for his own good, because what he did is it's like he saw me because I was grabbing a my Converse shoe, and he immediately went under the thing the air conditioner, like between the windowsill and the air conditioner. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So I have like a yardstick. I grabbed the yardstick and I eased him out. He's like, I know this game too. So you could hear the smacks. And my my parents are like, what's going on in there? I'm like, it's like I know I've been referencing it a lot, but it's like Jason and the Argonauts with the skeletons. That's what was going on right there. Oh my gosh. The things that go on in this room, I'm glad nobody has, there's no security cameras or anything. It's ridiculous. Oh man. Okay. So first we're going to see Foxy Alex's little adventure, and then it's going to segue into Slim Jim leading a parade. Okay, and this is again a Jersey City news, and it's July 22nd. All right. So Newsies placed declarations of war beyond reach of a rotund policeman. And gosh. So very late last night, a little newsboy was seen climbing up the tall telegraph pole at the corner of Montgomery and Washington streets. He had a placard in one hand, and when he reached the height of 7 or 8 feet, he tacked it uh, to the pole. He then slid down and almost landed in the arms of a, again, rotund policeman who gruffly asked, "What's that you've put up there?" "That's notice that we're on strike," replied the little chap, who was no other than Foxy Alec, one of the ringleaders in the newsboy strike against the greed of two New York yellow journals who seek to cut down the already small profits of the newsboy. Again, the proof is there that the newspapers all across America were calling them out. Their yellow journal antics and just exposing them for what they were. You know, the fact that it's saying against the greed of the two New York. And can I make it any more obvious? Okay, so then the policeman says, take it down at once. And, and Foxy says, what do you think I am? If you don't like it, take it down yourself. I love this kid. I love this kid. So he says that, and then he darts past the officer who examined the height of the notice and then, regarding his paunch, concluded to give up any attempt at mountaineering. Oh, silly, silly. Okay, so sure enough, the boys had attached signs to telegraph poles and lampposts securely out of reach of the police, and these notices read, "Please don't buy the World or Journal." You know, I do have to say this is that in the movie, when the kids are painting the banners and their picket signs, all they say is strike. You could have at least been a little more imaginative and seen what they were, yeah, such as don't buy the World or Journal. Even especially after the song, the world will know and the journal too. You know, Mr. Hearst and Pulitzer, we got news for you. If you're gonna write a song like that, at least, yeah. Seriously. Okay. So then they went even further and had a parade through the downtown streets last night, headed by Slim Jim. That worthy in honor of the occasion donned an old high silk hat. Oh, he's really dressing up. Uh, which came down to his shoulders. I'm guessing it was back because it was too big for him. Uh, and he wore a long duster. Of course, I haven't seen very many top hats, so the men assembled. See, I told you, these newspapers cater to their, just like when I was talking about Spot Conlon and they had all the titles and everything. You're going to see it again in a minute. Okay, the men assembled at the back of the car shed near the ferry. That is their meeting place. You know, what's funny is that when we would write a lot of fan fiction on the mailing list, when we talked about the Brooklyn Newsies, their meeting place was usually the docks because you saw that in the movie. I don't know where it originated because I saw other people writing about it, and I did several times in my fan fiction when I talked about the Brooklyn Newsies, but another place was the warehouse. There was like this old abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn where they congregated. And don't know where it originated, but other people would write about it. It was like they met there or the docks. It worked. Okay. So here's these kids, Slim Jim surrounded by his staff, Foxy Alec, Danny Dwyer. I love that name. Danny Dwyer. It's those names that stick with you. And I don't know why, but Danny Dwyer, I tried to find more on him. Probably need to search a little bit more, but I was more interested in finding stuff that was pertaining to this. So, Mickey Doolin, Tim Harms, known as Nosy, Bob Green, called Lugs, a delicate reference to the length of his ears. Oh, and other distinguished gentlemen got the others in line. Say, men, began Field Marshal Commander in Chief Slim Jim. I'm telling you, okay. Yeah, the push must walk together and no slouching. When I say turn, you turn or you get your face pushed in. See? The people of Jersey City have their eyes on us and we want to do them proud. We air out for victory and nothing else. Now, when you're told to holler strike, holler, and the kid that don't go with us goes to the hospital on a stretcher. Great motivational speech about it. Oh goodness. So that's and and they went all down the street, around the block and everything. Yeah. It was a success. Dressed up in their distinguished regalia and everything. Oh my gosh. So those are the Jersey kids and the Jersey kids, I don't know what I'm not going to look for it. But they made it clear that they were going on strike to support the comrades in arms. Their parade came out successful. Seems like with the New York kids, they couldn't get a parade going worth anything. When it finally did, it worked, but it seemed like they constantly came up with problems. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about is because I meant to talk about this when I talked about the older ladies, Mrs. Shea and Mrs. Fenton and the catty ladies and all that. Because Annie Kelly, she's known for speaking at I think a couple of the rallies. I know of at least one that she spoke at. And I remember quite a few people tried to find more information on Annie Kelly. Well, it's a generic name. I mean, I did some digging, figured I would try and find some information since I was looking around and everything, and financial pages came up. There was a mortgage page that came up. I'm, you know, I did find that over in San Francisco there was a stage performer with the name Annie Kelly. That could probably screw up your search because if she went on tour and ended up in New York, uh, yeah, that could. And I mean, who knows? There could be so many things that could, when it's a generic name, it makes it really hard. Now, for me, I didn't realize because there was an article and, it was the one talking about how Kid Blink was disgraced. He had to step down. And And it talked about Annie Kelly's son. I had no idea that she had a kid. Now, I knew that she was older, but I didn't realize that she had kids. I tried to find information on him, but I wasn't gonna go too far into it. When I couldn't find anything, I was like, okay, maybe he was one that wanted to stay private. I mean, it's like, this is your thing, Mom, not mine. So, but anyway, in closing, again, this all came up because I was looking for information, trying to finalize everything for the Seattle side, and found faking yellow journalism and pretty much connected the dots as to how this was affecting Kid Blink's strike. So many people um were supporting Kid Blink and his crew because they had had it. When your own industry is calling you out, and I know I've said it before, when your own that that says a lot. You've really screwed up. Okay. You have seriously fucked up. And the bombshell for me was finding out that Pulitzer wasn't even in New York. I'm just going to accept that he was in London, considering that Ralph, his oldest son, had been in London a month earlier, had made quite the impression there. And I mean, the math is mathing on that one. But yeah, that surprised me. And reading that article about, Hearst stepping out into the street and the kids were taunting him, they weren't scared of him. You know, behind a desk, he's all that in a bag of chips, but when he goes out into the street, he's nothing. They don't care. You know. So and that again tells you a lot about where these newspapers stood during the strike. People had had it. It was a good run, but it was over. Write a book, write a fiction book. Just like the story that I found talking about this superhero rancher. Well, it would have been a great story, a book, not something you put in the newspaper. Of course, there were a lot of stories running in the newspaper. Do that, and then putting fake stories about diamond mines. People wanted to go out. This was an adventure era. People were going uh to the Klondike and all that stuff. Well, they weren't coming back because of that. And of course, the whole thing with the soldiers and all that is, that was another reason for people to get pissed off and want these two to fail. I don't blame them. So anyway, that was an eye opener for me, seeing all that. I mean, I knew about yellow journalism. I've known about it for a long time. I'm sure a lot of others have known about it for a long time, but and again, the whole thing with Pulitzer and all that. So anyway, I will close up here.